Hi, welcome back to Faye Stories. Imagine a man so rich, Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg, look like interns beside him.
Combined?
Combined. And not just cash, power. At his peak, he bent entire industries.
From tech?
From nothing. No pedigree, no investors, barely a schoolhouse.
So what was he selling?
Oil. But he didn't invent it. He learned how to own the system around it. His name? John D. Rockefeller.
Ruthless? Smart? Lucky?
All of the above. Plus, discipline that bordered on devotion. And here's the paradox. The US government broke his empire apart and made him richer.
Wait, how does that even happen?
Start at the beginning. Not a palace, a broken house. And before this is over, you'll see how one con man's son rewrote the rules of money. Rockefeller was born in 1839 in a tiny village called Richford, New York. Even today, the population barely reaches 1,300. No skyscrapers, no oil fields, just fields. And silence.
So not exactly a business incubator.
Yeah. But what makes this story even more insane? His father, William Rockefeller, best described as a professional con man. He posed as Dr. Livingston, selling fake miracle tonics. He scammed farmers with cruel loans, seized their land when they couldn't pay, and at home, he stole money from his own family, cheated constantly, and finally, abandoned them. Years later, when John was already rich, reporters discovered the man still alive, living under a fake name with a new wife. Not even his family knew when or where he actually died.
What the hell? He wasn't just a bad dad. He was a cartoonishly bad dad. How do you grow up in that kind of chaos and become a titan?
That's the million-dollar question. And let me ask you, do you think chaos makes discipline stronger or just destroys kids? Because out of this mess came a boy who was disciplined, religious, and painfully responsible. At 16, he finally landed a bookkeeping job, $16 a month. He worked like a machine, never late, never sloppy. Every penny earned or spent went into his personal ledger.
This man was bullet journaling before it was cool.
Pretty much. Keep that little ledger in your mind. You'll see how a teen's tiny rule quietly became the blueprint for everything he later built. By 19, he'd saved $1,000 and borrowed another from the last man you'd expect. His father.
What?
Yep, at 10% interest. His deadbeat dad, the same man who vanished for years, apparently still had some money stashed away. Rockefeller used that cash, plus $2,000 more from a trusted business contact, and started his first company.
Selling what?
Produce, grains, meat, whatever moved in bulk. He formed a partnership with a man named Maurice B. Clark, a decade older and more experienced. Together, they launched a modest produce commission firm, essentially a trading business, with $4,000 in capital. And for a while, things were stable, until oil entered the story. Not kitchen oil, the kind that would rewrite empires. In the same year Rockefeller opened his produce firm, 1859, something happened in Titusville, Pennsylvania that would change everything. A man named Edwin Drake successfully drilled the first mechanical oil well. Crude oil gushed from the ground. And just like that, the age of oil had begun.
So, what? People just started drilling all over?
Oh, it was a frenzy. Imagine every farmer, blacksmith, and gambler dropping everything. Buying shovels, hauling lumber, and racing to the hills of Pennsylvania. In weeks, entire valleys were filled with wooden derricks, tilting in the wind like scarecrows, mud everywhere, oil-stained boots, shouts of, "We've struck it," echoing from makeshift camps. They called it the oil rush.
Sounds like the gold rush, but stickier.
Exactly. But here's the brutal truth. Most of them lost everything.
Why?
Because oil wells were risky. Some hit nothing. Some sprayed too fast and ruined the land. Others found oil, only to discover the market was flooded and prices collapsed. Even the lucky ones made money for a week, and then watched their fortunes dissolve in mud.
So even striking oil didn't mean you were rich?
Nope, The supply was chaotic, transportation a nightmare, and refining still in its infancy. It was a dirty, unstable mess. But Rockefeller, he just watched.
Wait, he didn't join in?
Not at first. While others rushed to dig, he stayed in Cleveland, observing, calculating. He saw a pattern. Crude oil was useless unless it was processed. Refining was the bottleneck. And more importantly, it was the predictable part of the business.
So instead of gambling on holes in the ground,
Exactly. He gambled on refining it. By 1863, after years of study and savings, Rockefeller was ready. At age 23, he invested in his first refinery, still with his business partner from the produce days, Maurice B. Clark.
was he in charge?
Not really. Clark was still the senior partner, older, more experienced, more well-known in town. So the company wasn't even named after Rockefeller. It was called Clark & Company. Rockefeller handled the finances, yes, but make no mistake, Clark was running the show.
So Rockefeller was just the guy with the books.
He was more than that, but he kept a low profile. He watched the numbers. He tracked every cost, and he waited.
Sometimes the quietest guy at the table is the most dangerous.
He does. Now, refining crude oil into kerosene wasn't simple, so they brought in a third man, Samuel Andrews, a local chemist who knew the process inside and out. The company was named Andrews Clark & Company. Yes, even though Rockefeller had co-founded the business and kept it running for years, his name was nowhere to be seen. Andrews, the newcomer, made it onto the sign. Rockefeller didn't.
Wait, why?
Because Clark was still considered the face of the company, and Rockefeller, the bookkeeper. The roles were clear. Clark handled crude oil procurement, Andrews managed the refining, and Rockefeller oversaw the books, operations, and overall strategy. And together, they turned barrels of black sludge into clean burning light for American homes.
Did they already call it Standard Oil?
Not yet. That name would come later, when Rockefeller stopped waiting and took control. As the refinery grew, so did the cracks between its partners. Maurice B. Clark, still the senior name on the company, believed in one thing: quality. He insisted on buying the best crude oil available, even if it cost more. To him, reputation mattered. Premium oil, premium price.
So he wanted to position the brand as high-end?
Exactly. But Rockefeller saw the market differently. He believed the real power wasn't in branding, it was in volume. If you could make your kerosene cheaper than anyone else's, everyone would buy from you.
So the classic margin versus scale debate.
And it tore them apart. Rockefeller wanted to cut costs, lower prices, and expand. Clark wanted to maintain margins and play it safe. Their meetings grew tense, their visions clashed, and soon, they couldn't even agree on what crude oil to buy.
Andrews stayed out of it?
Mostly. He was a chemist, not a businessman. He stuck to his refining tanks and kept his head down. But eventually, it was clear. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a deadlock, so the partners made a bold decision. They'd settle it with a sealed bid auction.
Like, write down your number, highest offer wins?
Exactly. Each man wrote on a piece of paper what he was willing to pay to buy out the other. One would walk away with the company, the other with a check.
That's cold.
Rockefeller didn't flinch. He calmly wrote his number, sealed the envelope, and waited. And when they opened the envelopes, Rockefeller's number crushed Clark's.
So just like that, he won?
He didn't just win, he rewrote the future. And remember that envelope, because later, another piece of paper from the Supreme Court would make him richer than kings. At just 26 years old, Rockefeller became the sole decision-maker of the company he'd helped build in the shadows. He renamed it Rockefeller and Andrews, not out of ego, but because that was the truth now. Clark was gone, and Rockefeller? He didn't throw a party. He didn't call attention to himself. He simply walked back to his desk, opened his ledger, and wrote down the numbers. Then he paused, and for the first time, everything was his. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew this was only the beginning. Still remember that little ledger, the tiny rules in it? Those rules would later guide both his giving and the methods he used to build and control an empire. That same year, 1865, the American Civil War ended. The country was shattered, but rebuilding. And rebuilding meant industry. And industry needed...
Fuel?
Exactly. And Rockefeller had it, flowing by the barrel. With control secured, he doesn't celebrate. He optimizes. Every step, every cost, looking for weaknesses. And one thing kept bothering him: the barrels.
Barrels as in the actual containers?
Exactly. Crude oil couldn't just be poured into buckets. It had to be stored, moved, sold. In barrels. And barrels were expensive. So Rockefeller asked the question no one else was asking. What if I don't buy barrels? What if I own the barrel company?
Of course he did.
In 1867, he brought in a new partner, Henry Morrison Flagler, a businessman with deep logistics experience. He knew how to build supply chains. That's exactly what Rockefeller needed. Rockefeller once said, "A young man who wants to succeed in business does not require chemistry or physics. You can always hire scientists." And that's what he did, again and again. He didn't invent barrels, or pipelines, or refineries. He hired the men who did, and made them work inside his system. Then they restructured, now called Rockefeller, Andrews, and Flagler. Flagler standardized barrels, built in-house manufacturing, and reduced leakage and cost. The savings? Massive. And with each penny saved, Rockefeller tightened his grip. He wasn't just refining oil anymore. He was assembling an empire, brick by brick.
So this is when the expansion really kicks in.
Yes. But Rockefeller's true genius wasn't just in operations. It was in negotiation. And his next target was the railroads. By the late 1860s, oil had to travel long distances. Wagons couldn't cut it. Railroads were essential. But the railroads were competing hard, fighting to lock in big clients like refiners. Around this time, Rockefeller got involved in something called the South Improvement Company. It was secret, it was ruthless. And when it leaked, it set the country on fire.
Okay, spell it out. What did they actually agree on?
Simple terms. He promised huge, predictable volumes if railroads gave in discounted shipping, and shared shipping data, including his competitors.
Wait, what? Data on competitors?
And it gets worse. He got rebates not just for his oil, but for every barrel his competitors shipped.
Hold on. So not only did he pay less, he got paid when others tried to ship oil?
Exactly. The more they struggled, the richer he got.
That's either genius business or cheating. What do you think?
When the arrangement leaked, all hell broke loose. Small refiners protested. Editorials raged. But it was too late. Rockefeller had already used that leverage to start quietly buying them out.
By force?
Not exactly. He didn't threaten them. He didn't undercut them in public. He let the market squeeze them until they couldn't breathe. Then he'd offer to buy them at a fair price.
That almost sounds kind?
That's how he saw it. He said, "I believe in the survival of the most efficient." He truly believed he was saving smaller refiners from certain death. This period became known as the Cleveland Conquest. In just 6 weeks, Rockefeller bought out 22 of the 26 rival refineries in Cleveland.
6 weeks?
Private meetings, silent offers, no drama, just consolidation. And by the end, he controlled nearly all refining in the city.
Wasn't that illegal?
Not yet. There were no antitrust laws. He wasn't breaking the law. He was writing the playbook. By 1870, Rockefeller's grip on Cleveland was complete. But Cleveland was just the beginning. He believed oil wasn't just a commodity. It was a system. And if he could control that system, every part of it, he could make oil stable, predictable. So that same year, he created a new company.
Ah, so this is the moment it became Standard Oil.
Exactly. The name wasn't accidental. He wanted people to associate his product with consistency, safety, and quality. When others sold smoky, explosive kerosene, Rockefeller's burned clean. He didn't want to just dominate the industry. He wanted to set the standard for it.
That's some branding move.
And it worked. The name Standard Oil became synonymous with reliability. Railroads preferred it, retailers stocked it, consumers trusted it. But behind the label was an empire expanding with ruthless efficiency. After Cleveland, Rockefeller moved into Pittsburgh, then Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Chicago. City by city, he sent agents, offering buyouts, partnerships, or crushing competition.
So it wasn't just one big merger.
No, it was 100 small ones. Some refiners were relieved to sell, tired of price wars and instability. Others resisted, tried to hold out. But they couldn't match Rockefeller's prices. Not when he had cheaper transport, cheaper barrels, cheaper labor, and rebates they could never access.
So basically, he made it impossible for them to compete.
That was the strategy. Not just win, eliminate the conditions where others could win. By 1879, just 9 years after founding Standard Oil, Rockefeller controlled over 90% of all oil refining in the United States.
That's insane.
It had never been done before. No company had ever controlled that much of a national industry. He called it efficiency. His critics called it a monopoly. But here's the thing. Rockefeller didn't see himself as a villain. Not even close. He believed, truly, that he was saving the American economy. In his eyes, the oil industry had been chaotic, dangerous, and wasteful. Fires, explosions, fraud. He thought, if I can control it, I can fix it. If I can fix it, the whole country benefits. And to be fair, he had a point. Standard Oil did lower prices. It did improve safety. It did stabilize the supply chain. He believed he wasn't just building a company. He was building order.
But that didn't stop people from hating him.
No, because once you control everything, people feel like they've lost something, even if the product got better. Newspapers ran editorials with headlines like, "The Octopus of Oil." Cartoonists drew Standard Oil as a giant squid, wrapping its tentacles around railroads, the government, the courts.
Dramatic, but kinda accurate.
And here's the scary part. There were no laws to stop him. Antitrust laws didn't exist yet. Regulators had no tools. Judges had no precedent. The press screamed, the people marched. But the system had no teeth. And Rockefeller? He stayed silent. No pressers, no rebuttals, just expansion. Because for him, dominance wasn't a goal. It was a means. He believed that if he could control the system, he could make oil cheaper for the public, safer for homes, and more profitable for the country. And for a while, even his harshest critics couldn't argue with the results. By the early 1880s, Rockefeller was no longer just a businessman. He had become a symbol. Newspapers blasted him daily. Editorial cartoons pictured him squeezing the life out of smaller companies. Columns hinted at bribed judges, friendly senators, secret deals.
Were any of those things true?
Some were, but more important than the facts was the perception. And perception had turned against him. He wasn't elected. He answered to no voters. Yet to many, he seemed to steer the economy itself. And that made people uneasy in a way prices and profits never had. When people fear power, they stop arguing about product quality. They start asking, who controls the rules?
So, what did the government do?
The governments began to move, slowly at first. States drafted bills. Federal officials argued about how to handle trusts. In 1882, the first real probes into Standard Oil began. But Rockefeller had already planned for probes. He didn't meet storms head-on. He engineered a shelter.
Of course he was.
He created the Standard Oil Trust. On paper, dozens of apparently independent companies, each with its own board. In practice, Through voting agreements, stock controls, and legal structures, a single management controlled them all. Visible pieces with invisible strings.
So it looked like competition, but it wasn't?
Exactly. To the public, it looked like rivalry. To the market, it looked like control. It was legal, innovative, and deliberately hard to untangle. The irony deepened. Businesses that had complained about him soon copied the same structure. Steel, rail, sugar, tobacco. Everyone learned to hide control under layers of paper. The trust problem ceased to be Standard Oil's problem. It became America's problem.
So he basically invented the modern corporate shell game.
Exactly. And Congress responded, eventually. In 1890, lawmakers passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, a headline promise: no restraints of trade. But the law was thin on detail. No clear enforcement map, no operational definition of a monopoly. Words had been written, but the tools were missing.
So the law changed, but nothing else did?
For a while, yes. That vagueness bought time. Standard Oil trust kept growing because you can't cut a web with a blunt phrase. Detangling a nationwide corporate labyrinth takes lawyers, investigators, and years. It would take nearly 2 decades before the government could build the case that actually reached the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, Rockefeller did what he'd always done: stay out of the spotlight, avoid grand speeches, and tighten his influence quietly. Power without noise. And then, when the courtroom finally arrived, it would not merely test a company. It would test whether the law could follow where industry had already led. By the turn of the century, the roar from the press had moved off the front page and into courtroom lights. Prosecutors began to dig through a forest of companies, dozens of corporations, thousands of contracts, and a paper trail that kept producing new threads the more you pulled.
What did that look like in practice? How did the case unfold?
It wasn't a quick trial. Untangling Rockefeller's structure was like opening a dusty attic. Reach into one box, and another falls out. Evidence came slowly, in stacks of ledgers, letters, and agreements. In 1906, the United States government filed suit against Standard Oil. The charge wasn't just success. It was that a single system used trust agreements, stock tricks, and contracts to control the market. The prosecution had to prove this was not competition. It was a machine that replaced competition.
Did Rockefeller take the stand? Did he defend himself in public?
He did not. He had stepped back from the limelight. He let lawyers take the stage. His silence became part of the defense. Years passed, witnesses testified, account books were parsed line by line. The sharpest things in that courtroom weren't rhetoric. They were numbers. Market share, rebate schedules, shipping records. Then, in 1911, the Supreme Court issued a verdict. Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly and must be broken into 34 separate companies.
34? Tear the empire apart. Surely that crushes him, right?
Here comes the twist. You think a breakup equals ruin, but Rockefeller owned large stakes in those very pieces. The breakup created many independent companies, each with its own market value, and investors rushed to reprice them. Panic turned to reassessment. Stock values rose. His net worth, unexpectedly, grew. What the government intended to destroy, the market converted into liquid capital. The court had sliced the corporate body, but wealth and influence, held as shares, reassembled in another form.
So the breakup made him richer. The very action meant to limit him ended up enlarging his fortune?
In a way, yes. The court split his empire, but what they unmade in central control, they accidentally turned into a flood of value. Measured against the economy of his own day, Rockefeller's fortune represented a truly staggering share of national output. By modern accounting methods, it's often cited in the hundreds of billions. By contrast, the headline names of today, Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg, while enormous, sit on a very different map of capital and markets. The point isn't a head-to-head brag. It's that Rockefeller's wealth operated on a scale relative to his era that's almost impossible to recreate. This outcome wasn't mere luck. Decades earlier, Rockefeller had built structures, voting agreements, cross-holdings, and legal scaffolding that blurred where control ended and ownership began. Courts could rename entities and reorder charters. They struggled to undo a web of economic influence. So the final question from this chapter is painful and practical. Is a legal victory that fails to remove systemic power truly a victory at all?
What became of those 34 companies? Do they matter to us today?
They do. Names you recognize: Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, Conoco, trace roots back to the pieces of Standard Oil. The empire didn't vanish. It morphed and multiplied. The case left a clear lesson. Law needs more than words. Enforcement, investigative resources, and an eye for how markets react are essential. Otherwise, the remedy can reshape the disease into something equally powerful. This chapter is less about a single man losing or winning. It's about how legal systems and markets dance, sometimes in step, often out of sync. After the court fights, Rockefeller largely stepped away from daily business and focused on philanthropy. But that shift wasn't a sudden conversion. He'd kept ledgers since he was 16, dividing earnings into living, saving, and giving. Small, steady gifts were a lifelong habit.
He started that young?
When business life slowed, that habit scaled. Foundations, hospitals, universities. Built with the same managerial rigor he once used on refineries and rail contracts. Finally, that little ledger we mentioned, it wasn't just a notebook. It was the blueprint. The result is a bitter paradox. Real institutions enslave lives, paid for by methods many call ruthless. So, predator or pioneer? And tell us which fact surprised you most.